guest on, Representative Justin Price. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kate.
I appreciate you're here to tell folks about a bill introduced this week pertaining to the fisheries and fishermen in particular in terms of regulations around the state and what happens even in the minor regulations, if there's minor infractions, how it's adversely, and as you've put forth, impacted fishermen. They'll take equipment, they'll basically have to go through a very, as you said, onerous legal process.
Right.
So talk with us a little bit about how this legislation would help fishermen out trying to make a living. There's thousands of fishermen here in the state.
Certainly is. It's a big business in this state, employs probably 5,000 people. The legislation that we're putting forward is, what it does is if the fisherman or the vessel gets a violation and their gear's seized or they get a fine, what they can do is they can petition the Supreme Court, post a bond, and get their gear right back so they can continue fishing. So they, if it's the fishing season and they get their gear confiscated, they'll lose all that fishing time, could potentially put them out of business. So what this does is it kind of evens the playing field, lets them get their gear back, lets the courts decide what, if the penalty fits the violation, and lets everybody continue on working. Lets the fishing industry continue.
So it sounds like, as you mentioned, again, they'll go through the legal process again, whatever it was purportedly found in terms of a purported violation, but this way it enables them to keep working throughout the process.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So they get their gear back, they can keep fishing. And I worked in the fishing industry probably 25 years ago, and I worked there for quite a while. So I understand these guys, these men and women are hardworking people. Most of them, the large percentage of them try to abide by all the federal and state laws, but there's just so many of them. Sometimes they'll get hung up on something and they'll get their catch seized and their gear confiscated. So I hear from the fishermen all the time, and it's really a situation that I hopefully this will be able to find a happy medium between DEM, the fishermen, and come up with a resolution.
Come up with a solution, because does it seem like it's a little skewed on one side, again, on the protection side, and again, here we have, as you said, about 5,000 folks who make their livelihood in this industry.
Right, and DEM, they're doing their job, and I think this legislation will enable DEM to continue to do their job, and the fishermen continue to fish, and I think it's a good piece of legislation.
We've got the full report. Hopefully we'll be able to maybe get some access to it. We'll provide links to the bill legislation for afterwards, so folks, if you're interested, you can see about this particular bill, again, to allow fishermen to be able to post bond, get their equipment back as they go through the legal process if there have been any violations found. I appreciate you taking the time to come in. Anything else about this piece of legislation that you think folks should know?
I just think if anybody really wants to learn more about this and what they're up against with the federal and state regulations, I just saw a video. It's called Fishing Wars. It's a documentary. If you look up Fishing Wars, it's all about the fishermen in New England. And it's pretty enlightening.
Pretty eye-opening.
Pretty eye-opening.
Well, we'll include that in there as well. So, Justin Price, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about this piece of legislation introduced this week. We'll continue to follow it, and I'm sure we'll talk with you in the near future.
And thank you, Kate.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yep, thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here at the Rhode Island State House. Stand-in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to GoLocal Live at the Rhode Island State House. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome now my next guest in, Representative Aaron Ruggenberg. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
It's been a busy week. It's been a busy session. We kicked off today's show by talking with the Speaker of the House regarding legislation to put the ethics forms that elected officials and folks around the state have to file with the State Ethics Commission online. Now, legislation was introduced. He says he hopes to push it forward. You can get Board of Elections, you can get campaign finance, you can get lobbyist reports online. What was your take about this process? Was this long overdue?
Absolutely. I was really excited to see us taking on this issue. Congratulations to GoLocal for really putting a spotlight on it and helping to promote that policy change. We should be promoting transparency. We put campaign finance online. It's never made much sense to me that we don't have the ethics forms online as well. Obviously, you can get them in offline ways, but I worked really hard to with the Secretary of State to get online voter registration through. And what we talked about on that issue is there's a lot of people who operate online right now. Why don't we want to make our government as accessible as possible and transparent as possible for everyone?
Well, we're going to be putting on, I believe, most of the current elected officials' ethics forms tomorrow to just show that the ease of which, so we're going to continue to follow this legislation as it's been introduced. But I've got my notes here. You've had a busy couple of weeks. Let's talk a little bit about this week. Let's talk about Dreamers and DACA and that legislation.
So I have so much gratitude for the leadership of Representative Maldonado, who's been working really hard on legislation to make sure that we are keeping state level protections for our Dreamers, no matter what happens or doesn't happen in Washington. And so Representative Maldonado, I've been proud to work with her, but she introduced and had a hearing this week on that legislation to make sure that our Dreamers who are in here, who've been contributing so much to our neighborhoods, to our community, to our economy, are able to continue working, are able to continue driving, are able to stay the productive, wonderful members of our state that they currently are.
So let's talk a little bit about this from a national level. Is this something that you're seeing other states taking a similar approach in?
So I think a lot of states are trying to figure out what do we do to protect our immigrant neighbors, given this xenophobic stance that we have out of Washington. The legislation that Rep. Maldonado really championed, it's the first of that specific kind in the country. So I think it's an opportunity for Rhode Island to really be a leader, to show this is how we can protect our immigrant communities, particularly our young people, our Dreamers, that are doing so much good in our neighborhoods, and really there's no reason to be discriminating against them.
Now, is this a little bit of a litmus test, if you will, clearly with what's going on at the state levels and the federal? One of the pieces of journalism that GoLocal did this week unveiled that someone who worked at a medical marijuana compassion center tried to get a mortgage that was going to go through Rhode Island Housing. Because it was FHA, they were denied because of the discrepancy between federal and state. Do you have any concerns that even if protections are put in place at the state level, that somehow the feds could supersede?
Of course, that's a concern. I mean, all of these policies, every policy that we're talking about right now, ideally you want to have it at the federal level, both because that means it covers everyone in this country, and because that's the ultimate level of authority. We know what we have in Washington right now. We have an administration that is anti-immigrant, that is, it's run by a bunch of, I'll be honest with my perspective, neo-fascist, oligarchical billionaire buddies. And so we've got a Congress that's really allowing that perspective to reign. And so I think if we want to take leadership on these issues, we need to step up at the state level. We need to use the resources and the tools that we do have constitutionally here at the state level.
Just yesterday, hearing for universal health care, what was the testimony like at this hearing?
It was on the Senate side, but it was a great hearing on some great legislation. This is an issue that is really a passion for me. Rhode Islanders, we already pay enough to have universal health care in the state. It's just that we pay it in really inefficient ways, to advertising, to billing, to marketing, to CEO bonuses and corporate profits, instead of making sure that the resources are really going in a rational way to patient care and health care. And so we have this legislation to create a single payer system at the state level to make sure that everyone has access to care, and that we're putting all of our dollars into where it actually counts. And so there was hearings, there was a testimony from physicians, from people from the medical field who talk about both on the patient end, having patients who, we literally still have people who die because of lack of access to care, and that's a reality. talking about it from the professional perspective, someone who, doctors who got in it for wanting to help people, and now they're spending all their time doing billing and paying forms and figuring out how to pay for things that should just be provided to people. So I think, it's a big lift. We obviously have a very powerful for-profit healthcare industry that spends a whole lot on lobbying in this building and nationally. But I think we're starting to have some real momentum around conversations in this building that I've heard that I never heard a few years ago about how is our current healthcare system working? Is there better ways that we could structure this to make sure that we have universal care for everyone?
Today, net neutrality?
We've got a lobby day today on net neutrality. The free and open internet is really the cornerstone of our economy right now. It's how institutions like GoLocal are able to shake things up and thrive. And there's a real threat. In 30 days, less than 30 days, the end of April, the Trump FCC's new rules eliminating net neutrality, eliminating the protection to say that once you pay your initial internet access fee, you can go where you want, how you want, when you want on the internet. That's really in danger. And that principle that said that, that's really made the internet one of the last few public squares where everyone's on the same level. There's things we can do again at the state level to step up to protect that. We've got a lot of folks coming here today to make that case to the legislators. Again, it's an issue where you've got some powerful, well-heeled cable companies who come in here and say, we're not going to do this. Why would we do this? Now, they just spent tens of millions of dollars to have the opportunity to do this, but they say we're not going to do this, so we don't need to. We say we should step up and protect Rhode Islanders, protect businesses that rely on the internet, and protect our public state buildings and taxpayers to say that we're going to use the principles of net neutrality moving forward.
And you've got a few things moving forward this coming week between guns, reproductive health rights, and some employment issues too. Talk with us about what's on your agenda this coming week.
So I'm excited. Actually, we have a hearing in House Labor this afternoon on a piece of legislation that I've been working on. It's been nicknamed the Benny's Bill because it's around creating a framework for business owners who are retiring, who are closing their businesses, to have another option to sell their company, and workers who are at those businesses to have an opportunity to come together and use the worker co-op legislation that we passed last year to keep those jobs, to keep that business moving forward. I think it's an exciting piece of legislation because we've got a lot of businesses in the state with owners who are going to be retiring in the future. This isn't about forcing anyone to accept a bid from workers, but it's about creating a process and a framework so that workers have the information that they need to come together to put forward a bid, which could be a better option for the business owner as well. And so if you have one path where you have a beloved business that's closed down and you have a bunch of workers who lose their jobs, and you have another path where that business can continue contributing to our community, and you have workers who are able to become business owners themselves and take on that entrepreneurialism that we want to see in them, I say we should create that process and framework for them.
The Benny's Bill.
The Benny's Bill.
Well, I know you have to get off to the races, Representative Breckenberg. I appreciate you taking the time to come and walk through some of the items on your agenda, because we could probably talk for another hour here, but we're going to be able to go back to the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center at 4 with Molly O'Brien. Representative Breckenberg,
thanks for having me, Kate.
I appreciate it.
it.
We're going to go around the corner here. This is going to wrap up Go Local Live at the Rhode Island State House. Again, 4 o'clock kicks off with Molly O'Brien back downtown. And I'll see you tomorrow on Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel. Go News Editor Kate Nagel. Go News Editor Kate Nagel. Go News Editor Kate Nagel.